I would like to welcome all of you for coming here, and this is the first event that opens our arc of projects related to HereAfterHere, a self-guided tour of eternity, which will open at the New Cabrillo Theater September 10th through 12th. And tonight's the first event that we're doing, and this event is honoring all the work of the videographers that have gotten involved in this show. I want to thank our funders and our sponsors for this event. It's quite an extraordinary thing. Often it's just the performers who get up at the end of a show and take a bow. But without all these other people putting their hands together and building community together, there would be no show. I'd like to thank the Cultural Council of Santa Cruz, the National Endowment for the Arts, the California Arts Council, Packard and Irvine Foundations. The videographer's work was funded specifically by a Rydell grant from the Community Foundation of Santa Cruz County. We also want to thank Digital Media Factory for hosting this event. Their generosity of making this happen is really terrific and a beautiful space for anybody to come in and work in. We want to thank Community TV for sponsoring the showing of this videotape and again being part of the building of community. And last but not least, we want to thank the Digital Media Academy for loaning to us for the show quite a lot of equipment for the Good Times and for the Santa Cruz Sentinel. Hello, my name is Tandy Beal, and I think I got us all into this. I'm very happy to be here. I'm a director, a choreographer, and a dreamer. I'm very happy to have brought together all of these fine artists from Santa Cruz County. We should be really proud that we're all able to work together on this show. I'd like to introduce each person to you and give a little bit of their background. This is Denise Gallant over here. Denise worked as a video artist in both the commercial and fine arts worlds, editing with NBC and CBS, graphic design with ABC. Her awards include an American Film Institute grant and the Billboard Music Award for Best Independent Video. I'd like to introduce Rebecca Blair, who on this production is our stage manager and rehearsal director, and I'm also very delighted that she's our company manager. She was a charter member of Maria Tolchi's Chicago City Ballet and Lyric Opera Ballet, and she also served as the ballet mistress. In Santa Cruz, she's taught adult and children's ballet at Studio School of Classical Ballet, Santa Cruz Ballet Theater, Motion Pacific Studio, where she was the co-director, and the International Academy of Dance. Jess Damson, she has her MFA from DANM, the Digital Arts and New Media program at UCSC, and a BA in Chinese from UCLA. She's consulted for companies from high-tech to Harley-Davidson, and she's fundraised for nonprofits and empowered youth through art education. Ben Jaffe over here, he's our media designer, or our Uber media meister. He has a bachelor's degree in theater arts from UCSC, where we first met, and he's worked for years as a theater electrician and sound designer. He teaches digital media at Digital Media Academy, as well as other places. He teaches web technology and programming classes, tutors, and does consulting work. He's also a musician, playing improvisational clarinet and piano. He co-hosts Geek Speak, a weekly radio show on KOSP, and a podcast about science and technology. This is Bruce G. Lee, a wonderful video artist that I've had the pleasure of working with for many years. He came to California after he graduated summa cum laude from Augusta State University. Here, he's received critical acclaim and awards for over 25 years in the arts, including the Gail Rich Award in '97 and Visions of the Scribe in '95. Nada Milchkovic is also a video artist. She recently received her MFA from UCSC's DANM program, and she's formed Awake Media with Sun Makamiyu Lundell Alan Lundell and Lakshmi Narayan. They work collaboratively to develop new forms of media, cinematic, and performative experiences in the virtual and physical realms. I'd like to start this off with giving you an overview about the work that we're doing. The official title of the work that we're doing is HereAfterHere, a self-guided tour of eternity. It has original music by John Scoville and video work by all of these artists, and it also has 20 dancers and actors. You know, this project is really the ultimate imaginative leap. None of us really know what happens afterwards, but it allows us a time to think into the future and to think about this most extraordinary event we will all participate in, whether we believe something happens or that it's all darkness and nothing happens. But because there's multiple answers to this, we needed multiple ways of bringing the question to the audience, because the questioning is really what's important.
And the sky is no more than remembered light. And the stories of Cirrus and Cumulus come to a close, and all the birds are suspended in flight. Not every man knows what is waiting for him, or what he shall sing when the ship he is on slips into darkness, there at the end.
I think one of the important things about working with media and live theater together is that media allows you to work with a different way of perceiving than live actors and dancers can. To make this piece, I really had to have something that brought us into an altered state of time and space, because there's no other way to deal with this subject unless you can do that. And you can't do it just with live theater.
So I'd like to take a couple of minutes just to talk about what my interests are and why it was so exciting to work on this piece. I've been interested in the way that media and live performers have interacted for years. There's something very special about that kind of mediation, you know, and also our fascination with media. I think it's true. There was a performance art piece in the 80s in which there was a live event and just of television showing what was happening in that live event, and everyone had to look at the television rather than the live event. So I'm always fascinated at how our attention is drawn from the live action to the mediated action or the media. I did all of the text. Any time you see text on the screen in the show, I did that. And I've for years also been interested in the way that the brain processes text, because it's processed on a different part of the brain. And when I'm looking at something and also reading something, there's something that goes on inside me that allows, I think, something deeper to come inside. It's a sort of distraction of my conscious in order to allow a deeper message to come in. When animating the text, I tried to create text that stayed out of the way as much as possible, so that it didn't draw attention to itself by being wild and crazy, but still had a kind of character to it. It was like an actor itself that appeared on stage in conjunction and in collaboration with the other performers on the stage. I'm also supremely interested in collaboration, and so I'm really honored and grateful that there are so many other video collaborators on the show, and also grateful that Tandy, you create pieces that encourage and allow this kind of collaboration because I think something greater happens with pieces like this, and that has to do with the way the community interacts in creating the piece and in viewing the piece.
My name's Denise Gallant, and I've always been involved with live video in some way. I mean, I do editing, I do post, worked at NBC, but one of my favorite things is to work with video live, and especially video combined with music. So in the past, I built a video synthesizer with my friend Rob Schaefer, and later with my husband, Kevin Monahan. And the purpose of that was to be in a club or at a concert live and be able to patch in the music to change different things about the video. So the music could change the patterns, how they move, or the color. So the actual tone of the music could change it from red to blue. So those were the kind of things I was thinking in the past. A while at UCSC, for instance, working under Gordon Muma in the electronic music department. And we were doing the visuals while other people were doing the audio. So that was loads of fun, and a lot of creative efforts and things went into that. A lot of live performances at Kresge Town Hall, for instance. I'll mention that since we're in Santa Cruz. And so that really is what got me started. Later, we were doing music videos in L.A. So I was one of the first VJs in existence, the first one in L.A. And it was all based on working with live video with music. At UCSC, I wrote a paper called Synesthesia, I guess that's how you say it, that combines what does your brain do when you combine music and visuals together. It's a particular stimulation that's different than any one of them separately. And particularly in this piece, with Tandy Beal, with HereAfterHere, and John Scofield's lush, gorgeous music, being able to think about what that visually is. His music is so visual. So what does that sound? What do I see? The interesting thing, such as the piece you just saw, for me is to see I hand over several visuals over to Tandy and to see how then she pulls them together, or Ben and the group pull them together to multiple screens at the show, let alone the live dancers in front of them. I haven't even, I never even think that far ahead. But to see the patterns that are created with the different pieces that were separate at the beginning is really interesting to see. So the other thing about HereAfterHere that was so engaging for me, not only the theme, but also I had just read this incredible book by Joe Premek and Nancy Abrams called View from the Center of the Universe. And the theme of where we are in space and time blended in so perfectly. So a lot of my inspiration visually not only came from the music, but also from them, including their gorgeous stars that Joe Premek is involved with at NASA, is what you see in that piece. The history of the universe is in every one of us. Every particle in our bodies has a multi-billion-year past. Every cell and every bodily organ has a multi-million-year past. And many of our ways of thinking have many thousand-year pasts. Each of us is a kind of nerve center where these various cosmic histories intersect. Time is one key to appreciate what we are. So the whole concept that we are creating new cosmologies right now in time. We are learning new things about the universe, and we're learning that the universe is in us, and we are part of the universe and a continuation of that explosion. So that's why I added the stars and the water to the visuals, because we are all part of that continuum.
And the weight of the past leans against nothing. And the sky is no more than remembered light. And the stories of Cirrus and Cumulus come to a close. And all the birds are suspended in flight. Not every man knows what is waiting for him, or what he shall sing when the ship he is on slips into darkness, there at the end.
This is Ben Jaffe who did a masterful job of bringing all of the parts, all of us together.
Yeah, I find immense interest in the overlapping of media and physicality, and like Denise was mentioning synesthesia and how our sensory modalities overlap in various ways, and also playing with that in a theater setting. But one thing that also interests me, and one thing that I have to deal with on a regular basis on a show like this, is the limitations of media, right? Although you can build something that's a lot more interesting, or maybe dynamic, or maybe takes you in a cosmic or even microscopic level, media also has intrinsic limitations when you're talking about the technical side of things. One thing is dancers can slow down or speed up to hit their musical cue or hit another cue. Media just can't, right? So that's one of the biggest limitations with media, is that it's a lot harder to synchronize it. And although we have a fantastic stage manager calling the show very precisely, one thing I do enjoy is some of the sections in the show are not the same every night. Some of the sections kind of they slide back and forth. The media the sound slides back and forth, or the media slides back and forth with regard to the dancers. It takes a lot of technology and a lot of technological interoperability, if you will, to get these images on the screens. We have 3 rear projection screens and a front projection screen in the show, and getting those computers to communicate and the video to work properly, and having one computer that signals to all of the others to get them to go and to stop and to do what we want, is definitely no simple task. So that's always something that's, in my mind, a lot of fun to wrangle with. Maybe some people might find it monotonous, but I find it fantastic.
I believe that after you die, your soul continues to live, and the physical difficulties that you experience in this life are no longer a problem.
I think I will live with Heavenly Father, and I think I'm going to have a big mansion, and I will have a big garden. And I think I'm gonna, and instead of walking, I'm gonna fly.
I don't have a clue what happens when we die. And that to try to have a clue would take something away from the reality of not knowing.
I'm Jess Damson. I did the little zoom out from the universe into the eyeball here, which segued into a series of interviews that were done where these people weren't really prompted what to say. I think they had some real general questions about how they feel. So this was really spontaneous responses collected from hundreds of interviews, and Nada actually did quite a few of their own. So there were probably 5 or 6 sources of these different interviews coming in from people that were used. And for me, this is one of the great aspects of what's happening with media and collaboration now, is it really is a dialogue with the audience as well as the artist together. And it's really the whole process is the point. The whole process of the dialogue is the point. So for us as artists working together, we did that, but it continues out into the people who are the audience being part of the performance, seeing the performance, and that continues on and on. So the whole process of dialogue, and how does an image and a sound and a voice, and how that's portrayed in a physical space, how that creates new messages for us, and the dialogue of messages that it sets in motion is the point. We were talking about technical things too. I thought it was great to experiment with so many people with an image that might just be coming from somebody we didn't even know it was coming, about water or something else, and we look at it all together and we try to figure out, okay, should that be on a space that's vertical, that has opening doors with people coming through it? What kind of message does that make, as opposed to if you have 4 or 5 different things happening up on the large stage popping around? So there's so many ways to create a feeling and a message now when you have media working with performance artists. I have to say, for every piece of media that is in the performance, there were probably another 100 created, starting with Tandy's vision years in advance, really, of people just imagining how would you make a message like what she's saying in an image. So we had this incredible sort of database of images and sounds and ideas from Tandy's original vision, and had this great process that, because of Tandy's amazing experience and collaboration, had this incredible overarching message, but each individual piece of it is so important also. Each interview from each person and each little silly universe going into an eyeball has a purpose.
There's euphoria and there's peace. But that's, of course, if I go to heaven.
Right, you know all that talk about the light and stuff? When you die, you see the light? What that is actually your spirit taking a picture of you. And you're not sure, you're still confused whether you're in your body or your spirit or human, so your eyes are still like...
It was a great honor when I got the email from Tandy. I had just had my, what would you call a midlife crisis, and I went back to school after 20 years. And I was just starting. School hadn't even started yet at the UCSC Digital Arts and New Media program. And I get an email from someone that Ben's very good friends with, Lyle Troxell. He said, is anyone in town, and do they want to work with this incredible artist, Tandy Beal? And I have to tell you, the way she works is a lesson in itself, and that he had never known anybody to work as giving and as collaboratively and community building as Tandy, and I jumped on it. I've been a media person my whole life, since I was in second grade, and we were in a grade school, elementary school, that they didn't allow us to talk while we ate lunch. And I remember just sitting there in silence thinking, boy, if there was at least a little music. And so I started being a DJ in second grade. They allowed me to play my 45s of Oh Cecilia and All There Is Love. It was 1972. And then I just kept going from there with audio and visual. But I've been an interviewer. That's been my thing. I love to interview people. I love to try to see what it's like to look out from their eyes. After we talked and we spoke about what my skills were and how I could help contribute, it was with the interviews. And then I'm also very blessed that I have a lot of children in my life. The chance to interact with these little people and ask them their idea. It's like from the mouths of babes, they say, the wisdom. They're like closer to it. Like they've been there just a little bit before, you know. And so it seems like their insights were just magic.
And you're still a radio DJ.
Oh yeah, and I do radio and I do digital. I interview people. I interview artists. I interview. I want to give the voice to people, and media is so easy now for us to give our voice to the world.
This is actually footage of my great-grandmother in the 1920s and my aunt, who was at that time about 8. This little piece here, I don't know who they were, but that baby would be about 79 years old now. Because my dad was about 5 in this. Again, the blending of the people into the stars gets back a little bit to the view from the center of the universe. And again, I will read from it, because this has to do with standing in the middle of time. We stand at the center of our planet's light cone of past and future. In one direction lies everything that has ever existed or happened in the universe that can have affected us. And in the opposite direction lies everything that we can possibly affect into the most distant future. So I think that kind of sums up what this is for me. It's about generations. All of the efforts and all of the wisdom and all of the mistakes that people have done in the past, and people before us and pre-people, come all the way to this moment in time. Scary, huh? That the words coming out of my mouth actually relates to all those generations in the past. And whatever I say right now may affect everything that comes into the future. So it really puts an emphasis on where we are now. But it also is part of the time continuum again. We blend into that future and we blend into that past just as we are now. So it's sort of my visual interpretation of, again, the theme of the here after here, or the here now, and the here then. to now, to future. So that's a little bit of how I visualize that.
I was able to contribute the older women that are waiting, and the piece comes from a visit to my ancestral village in Serbia. I agree with what Denise is saying. I also think that we have memories in ourselves that are continuums of our ancestors and their survival to bring us here today. And the women are from my village and are more than likely, some of them are relatives of mine. And because this village is in the mountainous range in southern Serbia, they've really just recently got into the 19th century. And I mean really 19th century. Within my lifetime, I've seen them get electricity and indoor plumbing, and I've seen them come into modernity. And so those women were waiting. The next shot would have been into a doorway where my aunt was dead. She had died unexpectedly while we were there in the village. And so we were waiting. We were in the waiting room. And her best friend is the woman at the very end. And we see her hands and the loss of her best friend, who was also her neighbor for 85 years. The ability for me, because I've been videotaping my relatives since I was a child, they just ignore me when I go there, and they just let me, even in the most really dire times, they were more than happy to share with me and us.
This is one of the sections we call the magic boxes. I feel like this was a masterful collaboration between Ben, Rebecca, and myself of making magic take place, so that you feel like there's a simultaneous worlds going on, that there's things that happen that we don't see that are going on. That we had the little people that were up there looking. At first you think they're real, but the scale is slightly off. And we call them the attic people. They're watching what's going on below. Below there's a woman who's pouring a pot of tea, and she pours it for the entire sequence all the way through this. It's endless. This thing that should take place in 20 seconds goes on for 3 minutes. We have a trick pot that does it. But to try to get the simultaneity of worlds so that you have a sense that we don't really understand what's going on. And one of the things that John, my composer husband, said to me, he said, well, you really actually kept alternating between seeing the virtual and then seeing the live, so that neither distracted but both enhanced.
As the stage manager for this, I came to it in a very different way than everyone else on the panel. My performance background is classical ballet, and when I started stage managing, everything that I had stage managed up until this point was dance performances. So when Tandy asked me to be part of this, I realized that one of the most important things that I was going to have to try to accomplish as the stage manager was to make the transitions between the media and the spoken word and the dance as seamless as possible, so that the audience didn't have a big sense of, oh, now we're seeing video, oh, now we're seeing dance, and to try to make that incorporated just in their experience visually. I find as an audience member, when it's a human being that is performing, whether they're dancing or speaking, there is a humanity to humanity connection. And you find yourself wanting to give back to that person as much as they're giving to you in their performance. And it's a little exhausting. Even when I go to some of my favorite ballet performances, at some point I kind of have to check out a little bit and just rest and relax, because there's so much input that you really start to just become so focused that you can't focus. I thought the video in this really gave it this nice moment of there was still humanity, but it wasn't a person there at that moment giving their performance, so it kind of gave you a little respite, I thought. The other thing that I thought Tandy did very well here, the dancers and the actors sometimes interact with the video, sometimes they're by themselves, sometimes the video's by itself, and then sometimes they actually react to the video. As you can imagine, it takes a lot of rehearsal for the dancers and one shot for the video, so, you know, quite a bit more there. There's one scene with the little magic box where one of the dancers has been dancing in the box. She leaves the box, walks out in front of it, and walks up to the video of an interview of a man and starts to listen to his conversation. So quite fascinating, and as a stage manager, kind of challenging to make it seamless, but we did.
I'm fascinated by all sorts of different perceptions that happen in this piece. And one of them is at the very beginning of the piece, as the opening credits are rolling on a video, then suddenly it stops and the film burns through as if it's a 35mm film, but it's really projected on video. So there's this kind of interesting tongue-in-cheek, well, what are we actually really looking at here? What are we perceiving? Is it really a film, and has it really messed up? And I think that just begins the whole journey into this world of, well, what is really here and what's really not here. There was a really fascinating moment when I watching the piece, couldn't for a moment tell whether I was looking at a video or a person. And that moment was really priceless for me, because it was really the true blending of, you know, of the perception of, like, what am I really looking at here? And it takes me back to the magic that happens with words and language, which is one of the reasons I'm so interested in the text. Because when we read something, and I'm an avid reader, and when I read something, I create pictures and sounds and feelings and tastes and smells in my own mind. So when I'm reading the pieces of text in the piece, I'm creating those. And some of the pieces in the show are beautiful pieces of poetry. They stimulate that kind of magical creation of images, and yet there is yet another image happening on stage that I need to compare that internal image that I'm having with the image that's actually on stage. And that's another piece of magic that I think happens so beautifully in this piece.
When the time has passed to prune the rose or caress the cat, when the sunset torching the lawn and the full moon icing it down no longer appear.
There was a sequence before where there are dancers walking from one side of the stage to the other, and there's video projected of dancers doing the same thing, or just people walking. And it was very interesting to watch the dancers live at each performance take their cadence off the video, because they were supposed to blend in, and you did find yourself trying to determine who was live and who was on video, but they so seamlessly matched the movements of their body with the video that it was really amazing. That's probably one of the sequences that you were talking about. You find yourself second guessing whether or not you've figured out who is where and what they are in it. So there are many places in that where you get to just stop for a moment and kind of think about how is your perspective really changing what you're seeing right there, and what is the person next to you perhaps seeing something different. So
I think one of the things that's interesting to me in using media, you're able to crisscross how you take in information. And although it's interesting, Rebecca said that when you came to the media, you could rest. I've had somebody else say that when you came to the dance, you could rest. Mm-hmm. That the text, that they could take time to kind of figure out what did that text mean through the abstractness of the video, of the dance. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's ways that we perceive, and how do we bombard the senses in a way that's not just like MTV overload, which is one way to mess with the synesthesia, but is there a way that we can track it on different levels and take us into perceiving kind of in octaves? Can you perceive in a big chord and not just on one level of perception, but several levels? I'd like to just take a moment and thank John Scoville for the music, although it's highly edited right now. All through the whole piece, he locates the visuals that all of us have been creating in there. He locates what's going on. And in this final piece, although I've never said this to you, but standing there on the stage, hearing all of these pieces of the world coming together, you know, there's some people say that you review everything you've ever thought, said, or done in your life as you die. And the way he brings in so many musical and sound elements, I feel like it's the quick review of an entire life that happens in there. That you just, from the crickets that I think were from Japan that he took from there. But it's all of those sounds and music and all of the elements of our lives getting connected. He spoke at length to me once about white noise, but I won't do it justice. Questions, or better yet, if you've got answers?
I did see the performance 4 years ago over here on the West Side, and I could tell, I hope I had this right, that the video that we're seeing here must be from the rehearsals for the new production. And so some things seem familiar and most didn't. And I'm just curious about the evolutionary process that has gone on in that time period. And I wondered if you could just say something about how this is coming about.
It was actually in 2007 that the first iteration happened. We talked about it as beta testing it. It's such a large show that we needed to beta test it before we moved on to doing it at the new Cabrillo Theater. I think one of the major things that's going to change is being in a large space. I found it very interesting that this piece got postponed and postponed. I broke my kneecap. The next year, the theater we were going to be in wasn't going to happen. Then the next year I got wonderful work with Bobby McFerrin. And I thought, well, do I lose a lot of money or make some money? Do I produce a show, or I'm going to go do that? So I postponed it for 3 years. And yet I cannot help but think that an underlying reason of postponing it is that I, like everybody else, really don't want to I'm superstitious on some deep level about if I talk about it, it's going to bring it on. If I talk about dying, it's going to bring it faster. I can't not see that that's part of the interplay that happens within that. The plot is thickened a bit as we get to this next iteration of it. There'll be a completely new dance in the beginning. It's a strange dance. I think it's going to be a wonderful way to start it. There were certain things that I understood there that could not happen because of the space, but I plowed along anyway. I was so grateful that West opened their theater for us, but I'm also going to be grateful to be in a full-on theater where you can work with illusion because of distance. Some people were worried that they are going to miss the intimacy that the West Theater provided, but on the other hand, there's a magic that happens when you have some distance. So I think those are some of the differences. Are there any other differences?
Certainly in the last couple of years, a lot of things have changed technically. When we did it back in 2007, we were using an audio queuing program to do the video, and it really was an audio queuing program. Some geek who knows computer science and loves theater decided to write an audio queuing program that was better than all the rest of them, and so he did. And then he thought, maybe maybe I'll add video to this. And so we added video, and probably a month and a half later, we started talking about doing Here After Here, and so I was emailing him back and forth. We had several glitches where video wasn't syncing up right, and so I was emailing the guy who writes this software saying, hey, this isn't working, what's up? And he was sending me fixes and patches, and it was really just nuts. And it was very, very by the seat of our pants, and luckily it all went off without a hitch from an audience, from the perception, the standpoint of the audience. But this year, he's been working on the video queuing part of it for 3 years now, and it's much, much improved. And so not only does this mean it won't be as precarious, or at least it won't feel as precarious, but it also means that we might be able to do more. So my intention is to maybe do the show by the seat of our pants because we're utilizing all of the new features and pushing the envelope even further. So that's my goal.
My question is to Tandy, really. Has your work become any more political in maybe the last 10 years, considering you're viewing, just like every other human being, the human condition is changing all over the world? And has that been reflected in your work?
In this work, I think, as the baby boomers slouch towards mortality, we're all looking at this issue straight up. And what Lou Harrison said was that art has the possibility of mollifying life. And I find that a very inspiring thought, that if we could use art as a lens to lift us to our better selves, a lens to open up to something larger than the material world. My own mentor, Alwyn Nicolai, absolutely resisted the boy-girl stories. And not only because he was gay, but also because he just thought, this is stupid. We have our lives to work out the boy-girl stories in whatever form they are. Why can't we use art to work with the intuitions that we have that do not frame in a literal sense or in a material sense, but can start to talk to the intuitions that we can't put words around? And so when I talk, answering this question is very interesting for me, because I feel that clearly the older I get, the more political I've gotten. And yet it's manifest in terms of dealing with issues that we're all dealing with, not materially. And if there's something political about the work that I'm doing, it really has to do with the community aspect. How do you draw the community into an aesthetic moment? Because if you look at the root meaning of aesthetics, an aesthetic experience, usually we think about truth and beauty. But if you think about the opposite of aesthetic, it's an anesthetic. So an anesthetic means to numb us, and an aesthetic experience is to enliven our ability to feel. And I think that that's what's really important to me as an artist. I think that in involving the community and the children's work that we have consistently done for 35 years, 40, the children's work is really political. It doesn't seem it, but to go out there and to work with kids who have never had a chance to dance, have never seen it, this gives people an opportunity. If a child has only ever had hot dogs, you can bring them to a fabulous restaurant and they can only order a hot dog because that's all they know. So if you open a child or a university student to the possibility of other ways of being, I think that's the deepest thing that we can do in terms of art and politics.
As you were talking just now, that's the energy you were just giving us about communicating and what the importance of aesthetics is with communication. It isn't just little facts we're supposed to know and such. This is what drew me to your project when you first talked to me about it, because I had been experimenting with anywhere from just doing a dance music sort of co-production on the East Coast with NYU and UCSC, and how do you deal with the half-second delay in time while you're trying to do 2 live performances. So all kinds of things like that, and how it affects what the audience feels and sees experiencing it. And I always felt that this was the perfect place for me to work with real artists about this sort of new language that we're all building with the rest of the world together, about what does it mean to see visuals as a language, as a message that comes along with all these other combinations, things that are doing the thing you were talking about, the package, the whole column of intuitive things that you can harvest from looking at what a whole series of artists can put together to start a dialogue with people. So I feel like we were sort of talking about brand new language that's a sort of a pigeon media dance communication thing happening, and just how it translates from like the screen that we're watching here compared to a live performance, and the fact this performance is going to be seen just on little screens eventually someday too. And we're already thinking about how do you do that so that it doesn't just become a little clip that somebody watches on YouTube for a second and it doesn't come across as something important. So I feel like this is sort of the future of media and art and message, and it's a brand new set of words and tools that we're the first people that get to present things and get the dialogue back with. So that's, to me, has been exciting with kids as well, because like you can go to UCSC work now and do media art while you're there, but for your thesis you can work with kids so that they understand the importance of how they're growing up into this environment where people are going to try to harvest things from them from these devices that are on their bodies 24/7. And how that media reaches them and affects them as an aesthetic experience, a life experience, a business experience, a social experience. So I think the work we're doing is important as artists to us with this new language, but it affects everything that's going to happen in the future with how we all relate with each other beyond art. So this is what Tandy's energy was right from the beginning of this whole project, was that it was bigger than the project.
I think it's also interesting, you know, as we talk about media, I know when I'm teaching now, I'll find any reason in my classes, the umbrella will be different. But I think this is a political issue. I'm going back to your question of how do you bring young people to a place where they're not having real life mitigated by devices or by media. And there's an assignment that I give. It started out when I first did it, you had to spend 30 minutes of silence with your cell phone turned off, your iPod off, your computer off, and not talking to anybody. And I had a couple of students really freak out, say they weren't going to take the class. And so then I dropped it down to, okay, just 15 minutes of unpluggedness. But I think there's something quite extraordinary about, even as we are enlarging our media savviness, the importance of our coming to quiet. And John, my partner in all things, said there was a big article in the New York Times yesterday about the importance of getting out into nature and unplugging, and how we are shifting how our brain is by not having this silence of nature. Back to politics.
Actually, my first experience with Tandy was as a student of hers. And one of the things that I learned in her class was how to be present, right? I had already kind of understood and gotten to, like, so my whole life is digital. My job is digital. My work is digital. Many of my friends are international, so they're digital. You know, and I mean, they're real, but, you know. But so much of our communication has been mitigated by digital devices, cell phones, computers. And in my life, I know that I try my darndest to stay away from media as much as I possibly can, because I do it for work, because I do it to communicate with any friends that are international. Even telephones, even, you know, landline telephones, you know, sometimes it's nice to just write a real live letter on this thing called paper to someone and send it, you know, by way of snail mail, as we now call it, which is a funny term that we've kind of created because of this digital world of instantaneousness. But one of the other things that goes with that, I think, is presence, being present, not having such a short attention span, not always bouncing between your cell phone and the conversation and your cell phone and the conversation. Cell phone being mail, being text messages, conversations via phone. And that's one thing that I know that Tandy teaches in her class that I really haven't found anyone else teaching anywhere. And I find it is probably one of the most important things I learned in college was that, in that class. And it's definitely served as a reminder to me of the importance of the one-on-one communication and I guess, that it's of lesser importance, the phone in my pocket or the computer in my bag, you know.
I want to say one last thing about the power of media. Video of this kind started with the history of film, and we've gotten better and better at audience members at seeing faster and faster cuts, more and more editing, wilder and wilder things on screen. And research has shown that it's actually changing our brains. It's changing how we perceive the world. And so it's incredibly powerful. And yet most media in the world is made in the service of advertisers. The storytelling that gets told, because there's this great history of storytelling as part of media, is to service advertisers. And I think it's incredibly important and absolutely essential for artists to continue to use media for the arts, to do that thing that creates the magic that is for no other reason than making the art. And I am so grateful to be a part of actually doing that. Thank you.
I just wanted to go along with what Bruce is saying, and the reason I got into media specifically is so that I could create, or that our company could create, media that helps the world. Our mission is to create media that allows the space for transcendence, for media to be used to help the world, to help people, and that is the goal, I believe, for all of us up here.
It's really exciting to sit here and listen to this conversation that's going on, and I actually have a couple questions. First, I work in the grief support program at hospice, and I know you're doing a benefit for hospice, and I think it's wonderful, and so we really appreciate that. If we look to artists as being the precursors for change, for social change, political change, it's productions like these that are absolutely vital for our culture to start talking about death and what it means and not be so scared of it. I'd also like to just pose a question regarding how much goes into such the technical production of this, which is so exciting. Just how do we keep the spontaneity? Is it through the dancers, or is it through the energy, or is there anything that, you know, holding those two different ends of the spectrum?
Exactly, your question is what I thought my greatest challenge was. And I think part of it is the dancers are so attuned to working with Tandy and working with that presence and working with improvisation that someone said tonight that every performance was a little bit different, even though the media was set. And I would have a little bit of leeway with that about when I called the cues, because sometimes I could make an ending take a little bit longer before we segued into the video if it seemed very poignant that night. So that, for the performers, I think, you know, keeps it very fresh and very active. And even tonight, I was going, was that in the video? I never saw that before. That's great. It's so layered. There's so many things there that I think even if you saw the performance more than once, you would find yourself revisiting the images after you left because you were always seeing new things. So
I think one of the things that's interesting to me, because I'm somebody who needs a lot of time to digest something, and so often in the works I've done, I think they're very specific and not layered with a lot of stuff. And yet in this project, I really needed to layer it. I needed that you couldn't pierce it fast, that you couldn't grasp it immediately. And I think there's something about that that makes it a little, you're on your toes with it, trying to figure out what's going on inside of it. I think the spontaneity is about keeping humor. And if we can keep our humor in the process, and sometimes it's hard, you know, you're right up against the wall, the pressures, the deadlines, whatever, you know, the moods, the personalities, everything comes crashing in always, usually at the same time.
So my question pertains also to the evolution of your work, and I was lucky enough to be there 4 years ago as well. And I was particularly impressed with the experience that a lot of the audience members were having, because we were interviewed about our feelings right before the performance. And that gave such a feeling of belonging, such a feeling of participating, which is often what I crave, is the experiential nature of things, as opposed to the divide between the audience and the performers. And I was wondering, have the interviews been ongoing? Are they going to be part again of this new performance? Because I just thought that was brilliant.
Oh, that's
and
great.
It was ecstatic for me. It really was.
We rented a truck about videoing people as they come in and as they left. And they have a 1 minute to 2 minute soundbite to say what they want about this and to have it videoed. I actually began to think that this whole archiving would be something great to just hand over to hospice, because it's a wonderful panoply of people's ideas of what happens, and it kind of makes you rest. This whole project is for us to just rest in the question together, to just stay there. There aren't any answers. Let's just stay in this question together. And my goal was, and I'm not sure if we can make this manifest, there were two parts of the goal. One is that we get people from that night into the show, but that takes a lot of effort. Or at the end of each night, whoever got interviewed that night, that there were TV monitors that were set up in the lobby so that as people left, they could see and hear themselves and their neighbors. There is a part, for those of you who weren't at this, there's a part, it's our quote-unquote intermission, in which everybody is invited to share their cell phone numbers before they come, just for that night, and we hand them out to everybody. And at the intermission moment, you're asked to turn your cell phones on in the theater and to call the person's number that you were given, or wait until you're called. And then you have a discussion about what you both think happens. Yeah, the interactivity is important to me. But the reality is, the most important part is that we all rest together in this question and think about it before it's a crisis in our lives.